It took 4 years for Guillermo Del Toro to follow up The Shape of Water, the film that won him Best Picture and Best Director. I'm talking about Nightmare Alley. However, this Academy Award-nominated film has had a drastically different run than its predecessor. It won no awards at the Oscars, has middling reviews, and with only making back half of its budget is a massive box office flop. But how will it be remembered? Is it just ahead of its time, or did the master of the dark fairy tale simply miss? Today, we break down all things GDT, from Blade 2 to Crimson Peak. This is the best and the worst of Guillermo del Toro. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of The Best and the Worst. We took a little hiatus, but we're back. That's Ben Bateman. I am Andrew Ghai, and we're here to talk to you about our boy, Guillermo del Toro. GDT. I don't think anyone calls him that.
We call him that all the time when we hang out with him at poker night.
He doesn't like it. He doesn't like when we do that. But yeah, so and Nightmare Alley just came out. The Oscars just happened. Nightmare Alley is a really interesting movie to talk about. It didn't make a lot of money, didn't really win any big awards or anything like that. So we're going to break it down. We both enjoyed it a lot. But before we get into the best and the worst of Guillermo del Toro, now that we are back, it's time for you guys to support the show. Ben, what's the best way for people to do that?
Yeah, if you guys are here for the first time, or if you're a returning viewer, you know this is a show where we pick a franchise, an actor, or a director. We break down the best and the worst of their career with a bunch of interesting and scientifically constructed games. If you guys want to support the show and you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, to subscribe if you're listening to this on the podcast app, and then leave a comment or leave a review, rating review, whatever you're doing, depending on whichever app you're on. Any kind of support you do there really does help grow the show, and it would mean a lot to us. So we love doing this show, and we'd love to see you guys on the next episode, and we appreciate you being here.
Yeah, absolutely love seeing the reviews, seeing the ratings. We're still at 5 stars. We're still there. Every single review has been 5 stars, so we still got that going for us in our lives. So today on the show, we're going to be talking about a lot of things Guillermo del Toro, obviously the best and the worst of his entire filmography as a director. We're going to talk overrated, underrated, and properly rated. It's something that we've done on Action Movie Anatomy for years, or we did on Action Movie Anatomy for years. We're going to talk about his career because he really is a very interesting director when it comes to how people perceive him and how people like his work. And then, of course, we're going to have a little bit of fun because Guillermo has a lot of fun destroying people's faces in his movies. I can't wait
to talk about this segment. It's
gnarly.
So wild.
When I first saw Pan's Labyrinth, I saw it like when it came out, maybe like a year after it came out, and I was much younger than I am now, obviously. It slightly traumatized me.
Oh, yeah.
Really intense. So I'm excited to get into that. But before we do all that, let's talk about Nightmare Alley. Came out in 2021, just recently. It was an Oscar contender, kind of, right? Like, did you really think it was going to win Best Picture?
Well, no. And when you say it's an Oscar contender, that's a really interesting loaded statement, because I think for people that just look at what got nominated and are maybe like a little bit less like paying attention,
right?
This was the 10th movie for sure. It was the movie on the day that the nominations came out that everybody
more
was
than
like,
Don't Look Up.
Way more. This was the movie. I mean, I would even go as far as say more than Drive My Car, which for most people was the 10th. But for me, this was like Nightmare Alley. This movie made no money. Like, most people I know didn't even like it. It wasn't particularly well reviewed. Like, this movie's not going to get nominated for Oscars. It was like one of those movies, like Revolutionary Road, where everybody's talking about it. It's going to be good, and then nothing happens. And then it gets like 4 nominations, and all of a sudden it has this second life.
There is this thing about this movie where I also felt like I needed its second life for me to enjoy it. So you were just talking about the money. This movie cost $60 million to make, and worldwide, its total gross just under 40 million, which is an astounding flop for a Best Director winner, and like for his follow-up to the movie he won for, In Shape of Water. So it's crazy. So Nightmare Alley, I'm going to talk about my experience first watching it, and then you can kind of like chime in halfway through, because what happened, because I think we actually maybe watched it at the same time, even though I started it like a month before you almost, it felt like.
Yeah.
So that being said, neither of us watched it in theaters. I don't really know why. We just kind of missed it. We didn't get a screener.
For me, I was recovering from surgery, so I missed all the screening invites. I just was like, yeah, I'll watch it later, and then it just kind of passed me by.
And then when it got released on HBO Max, I turned it on one day. I watched half of it, and I don't know if I was distracted, but I didn't feel particularly engaged, and then something came up to where I had to step away, and then I just turned it off. I came back to it over the next week and turned it on 2 times at the same spot, which is it's right after Kate Blanchett tries to out him or oust him at the like nice dinner party.
Yeah.
So it's like when he's in her office. I remember I turned it on. It was like 3 times in a row. It was that same scene. And I just was like, I turned it off. And I was like, but we're going to do the best and worst of GDT. Nice. I got to watch this movie. So I was like, you know what? And at this moment, I think you watched the whole thing maybe the day before I did.
Yeah. I watched it. I really watched it after the nomination came out. And I was like, okay, this is a movie that I now like, there's a little bit more like immediate reason to pay attention to it. And I loved it. And I think this happens sometimes with movies when the initial reviews are mediocre. It's this feeling of, I really like this. Am I missing something?
Right.
Why does everybody else hate this? Am I just an idiot? Do I think this bad movie is good? Like, you kind of are trying to qualify your opinion for a minute. And so I called you and I was like, I really like this movie. I mean, I think it was actually really good. And you were like, yeah, I think the same thing. No, you were like, yeah, I'm excited to finish it. The next day you were like, I think it's my favorite Guillermo Del Toro movie.
Yeah. So what happened was exactly what you said. You know, you watched it and then I was like, all right, I need to just buckle down and like get through this. It's kind of how I felt. So I was like, I need to start it over so I can actually be fully immersed in this. And when I finished it, I was blown away. The exact thing that you're talking about. I really kind of got caught up in the moment of thinking maybe it's my favorite Guillermo Del Toro movie, but obviously as we move through the show, you guys will see that it was definitely like when you walk out of a theater and you're like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Yeah. I really love the ending of this. So talking more about Nightmare Alley and like what worked and what didn't work, I think what you said is correct in that like most of the reviews were pretty mediocre. And talking to our friends, like, you know, our buddy that goes and sees movies at the DGA a lot, he was telling me that he was like, you know, when we watched Nightmare Alley at the DGA, I was kind of like, but then Guillermo came out and talked through it for like an hour. And he was like, I realized how much of a genius it is and how brilliant this movie truly was. And that was maybe the best thing I heard about it from like anyone at that point.
Yeah, this movie had a few things happen. I would say there was a noir version in black and white that was released that a bunch of people watched. And I remember when that happened, it really did a lot for the appreciation of the movie. This is a remake of a 1947 film that Guillermo was a fan of. So there was a bit of a throwback to that noir style. The other thing is that this movie benefited from HBO Max and Stream at Home, I think probably as much as any movie ever has.
Yeah.
That 39.5 million worldwide is not a real number because of that. I think it's
because it doesn't include the streaming numbers. Yeah.
Day and Date is not. This movie was not released on Day and Date, but it was released like 2 weeks later, I think, or even if it honestly had a full run and then it hit whenever it was. I just know that when it hit HBO Max, all of a sudden people were talking about this movie.
Right.
It felt like in theaters no one talked about this.
No, and it's so weird because like you look at the cast and I guess like Kate Blanchett, I don't want to say she's oversaturated, but like how do I put this like respectfully, because I love Kate Blanchett. I don't think people were going to this movie to see her.
Yeah.
I think they knew she was in it and she'd do a good job. Rooney Mara, also another interesting, great actress where I don't think she has like the clout that some like of the up and comers do right now, or even someone like Gal Gadot, right? Like you look at what she did and the fact that Red Notice is what it is. It's like just get superstars and put it in there. I don't think Kate Blanchett's there. I don't think Rooney Mara's there right now, and I also don't think Bradley Cooper really is anymore. It feels like he doesn't feel like superstar A-list Bradley Cooper, even though he's still a superstar and an A-lister, and I love Bradley Cooper.
He's just not hot right now.
He had like a really big moment.
Yeah.
You know, so I think all that combines to the fact also that Guillermo hasn't done a movie in a long time.
Yeah, this was 5 years. Well, 4.
Do you think people were just like,
I think there's a lot of factors why this movie had the reception that it had. I think its marketing campaign was a little convoluted. It was confusing if this movie was like a horror movie or a circus movie. I wasn't really sure what it was about. It looked like I was like, oh, this is a movie with some creatures. That's like what I thought it was going to be about. Nightmare Alley. I just didn't know. And it's not.
Yeah, that's actually interesting that you say that. When literally that exact sentence is kind of how I was feeling. It's like Bradley Cooper, Nightmare Alley, Guillermo loves his monsters. Like, is this like that type of movie?
I just didn't really know. And so I was like, okay, that's sort of interesting. I mean, Shape of Water, people, they can be revisionists about it if they want, but Shape of Water was not a movie that we were all talking about until it was a contender. Right. It was another weird movie. And if we're also being honest, the last time that he made a movie that was like a real big box office movie was Pacific Rim. It was a decade ago because nobody watched Crimson Peak either. Guillermo del Toro's name is not the name that it seems. It holds a lot of weight in terms of artistic integrity, but it doesn't hold a lot of weight in terms of box office. It hasn't, really. I mean, that's not who he is. He's a film lover's guy.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. And that's, I think, in this movie, so the stuff that really worked for me in Nightmare Alley is like he's created this amazing world as he does. The stuff that he does with color and his like weird, it feels like a fantasy or a fairy tale. It feels like there's something else that could be coming into this. We don't know. But this movie was pretty grounded in reality, which is a little different than most all the things he does. You know, this is just like, these are real people in real situations. So I love the setup. I love what we got with like, how do you say him? Strathern?
David Strathern, yeah.
You know, him and Toni Collette. I love them, and I love the setup. I love the world building of the circus. So many casting.
Good performers in this movie. It's just stacked full of people that I love to watch.
And they're like filtered in throughout the movie, right? Yeah. It's like you get Willem Dafoe early on, you get Collette and David, and then later on you get Jenkins, and you know, so it's kind of like, you know, just a little bit here and there. I loved this kind of setup, and then when it moved to him and Cate Blanchett, like I said, that was like kind of where I started to get a little disconnected. But when I tried to push through it that second time through watching it, I loved how this movie ended. I think it's actually one of the best like depictions of greed I've ever seen in a film, and like what it does to you. For the same reason that I'm always like, you know, if you don't want to do drugs, you should go watch Requiem for a Dream. It's like if you're like a super greedy person, or like you know that someone has like an issue with greed, this is a movie. It's a weird thing to say, but like this is that type of movie where you watch it and you're like, you had so many moments along the way where you could have just been happy.
Right.
You could have just been okay, content with where you're at. And the last thing was like the incredible juxtaposing scenes of Willem Dafoe describing what the geek is to Tim Blake Nelson geeking Bradley Cooper. I lost it. I thought it was so brilliantly done.
This has got to be, now that I really think about it, it's got to be one of the best casts of just like actors that I love I can ever remember. Because you just mentioned Tim Blake. I forgot. I mean, you throw in Ron Perlman and Tim Blake Nelson, Strathern and Toni Collette, Rooney Mara and Richard Jenkins and Colt McElhaney or his
Holt McCallany or whatever. Sorry.
You know, there's just so many in this movie. Cate Blanchett that are just terrific actors.
They're used perfectly.
And I just love all of them.
It's different than like a normal ensemble, right? Because in like, let's say like Don't Look Up, there's so many scenes where they're all together.
Yeah.
Whereas like this, again, like they're filtered throughout kind of perfectly.
Yeah, I think your points are correct. The cinematography was beautiful. The production design of the movie was incredible. I thought that the color and the world building was awesome. I really liked that he threads the needle on supernatural in this movie in a really great way.
Yeah.
That I think is really clever. There's nothing supernatural going on, actually, is what I think you're left with. Even the stuff with Strathern and Cooper and the like.
Because he's teaching him, right? He's like, and he makes it so clear, like, you can use these tricks to fool people and they will believe you, but you cannot go too far with it. You know, and that's literally all he ever wants to do is just push that envelope farther and farther, make more and more money.
And it's awesome. And I just, there's so much about it that I just really loved. And the love story and the broken love story and Cooper's fall from grace. I adore this movie. I mean, honestly, from like a pure satisfaction standpoint, start to finish, I think it's probably the most satisfying GDT movie for me. It's got like so much depth and like weight to the different moments.
I mean, I've thought about this movie ending for like a week every day. I would wake up or I'd go to bed thinking about it, just like, God, it's so, because the other thing that I heard people say online was like, oh, you know, I knew exactly where this movie was going to end when Willem Dafoe starts talking about the geek in detail. You're smarter than I am. You know, you're trying. I've realized that as I've gotten older, I only try to figure out the end of movies and like whodunits.
Yeah.
You know, like Knives Out was one where I was like, what? Okay, hold on. It's got to be this person. It's got to be this, you know. But in a movie like this, I let it just like happen. So I didn't even think about the geek situation at all, literally until like after Tim Blake Nelson said, "You smell like piss."
Yeah.
Because he was about to, I was like, he's really going to do it again.
Yeah.
Like, this is how stupid I am. I was like, he's really just going to do it again. He's going to trick Tim Blake Nelson into being a mentalist or whatever the word they use. And he's going to somehow start over, and that's going to be how the movie ends.
There was a minute there where I was suspecting that might happen. Because right the point that he does the murder, he gets on the train, he starts to go, I was like, is he going to go back towards Defoe and that original circus? I was like, is he going to return to his roots? And then I was like, oh no, he's going to be the geek. When I saw the chickens, I was like, oh, he's going to be the geek.
See, even then, this is why I think I'm a dumbass. Is I was like, oh, good symbolism, good symbology, you know. But like, I didn't piece it together, and honestly, I'm glad that I didn't, because as it's happening, and you look at the state that he's in, and then you think about, because they also flash to what happened with him and his dad.
Yeah.
And then that also leads back to earlier when she's like, you keep using that word, never. You never drink. You never do this. And it's like, we didn't see Cooper drink at all.
Yeah.
And then he started drinking, and you saw what happened in his life.
Yeah.
And then you see that his dad was an abusive alcoholic who he just murdered by hypothermia, which is not. There was so many of these things that are all layered together that by the end of it, it was just like, even talking about it right now, it's kind of giving me chills.
This movie's amazing. I really think for those that didn't watch it, I've been doing these little minute-long reviews. Some of you guys who listen to this have probably heard these like underrated masterpiece things, and I think I talked about this movie during Oscars week in its own little thing. But the more I've thought about it, the more I feel like it deserves one of its own, even though it got Best Picture nominated. Because I feel like still, even then, most people don't give this movie the credit that it deserves, which is like, there's an argument this is GDT's best movie. I mean, there's an argument.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into what we think about that a little later in the show, but this movie's really great.
Yeah, so it's, talking about how great this movie is, every movie has a great moment. We call that fist pump moment. It's the moment where something happens in the movie, you look around, you're like, are you seeing this? This is incredible. You want to call up your best friend, bro, turn on Nightmare Alley to this really cool part.
I'm having dinner with my newborn child and my wife.
This is Nightmare Alley. He turns into the geek, which is literally my fist pump.
The geek moment.
The geek moment. And I think it's because he got me. It's because I wasn't thinking about it. The moment where you see Bradley Cooper recognize what is happening to him, and then that like haunting look and laugh, and he's like, I was born to do this.
Yeah.
That, for me, and it also, the movie ends, it was like a very rare fist pump moment where it's like, you get the aha moment, you get this like horrible melancholy, and then you roll credits. And I was sitting there just like, yes, this is film at its finest. Like I was blown away, man. That was it for me.
It hit the button for you. Yeah, I think for me, there's a few that really come to mind, but the one that I was thinking about today was he goes in for the ultimate con with Richard Jenkins.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, you need to take this lie detector test, and you're like, how's he gonna get out of this? And then when he pulls out the line about Jenkins' wife, and he gets him. And, like, that moment, the intensity and the stakes are so high, and he's such a piece of shit. Like, there's so much about it that when it's happening, you're just like, oh, my God. That's, I think, it for me.
Yeah.
I think that moment is it's just such a good, like, he's in so deep, and it's so out of control.
In so deep is the best way to put it, because then, after that shit show goes down, he goes and tries to kill Cate Blanchett, essentially, after he finds out that she has been pulling one over on him. Total Matchstick Men moment, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, where at the end of Matchstick Men, like, obviously spoilers are happening in this episode.
Spoilers!
But, like, at the end of that, remember, it was like, Cage is just screwed.
Yeah.
And he just loses.
It's Rockwell and his fake daughter.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And then it's the exact same thing in this, where you're like, oh, you're not going to kill her. You're not going to get anything here.
Yeah.
And then the security comes in, and then it just becomes this, like, insane spiral. But I guess the difference between those two movies is, like, you really don't want to root for Bradley Cooper much in this.
He's like he's a real piece of garbage.
He's just a bad dude. So those are our fist pump moments. It's always interesting in a movie like this, because it is kind of like gross and grimy the whole time, but there's still moments. So you guys let us know either in the comments or review, whatever, what your fist pump moment is for this film, Nightmare Alley. Is there anything else you want to say about Nightmare Alley before we move on?
No, I'm glad we got to break it down. This is a movie I really wanted to talk about, and I'm glad this is our return to form.
I know
on the show here.
So. It's a really good movie, and I think as time goes on, people might look back and start to give it just a little bit more credit than they have.
Yeah, agreed.
So let's see. Let's go into. I'm trying to think here what we want to do next. Do we want to do the face smash part? It's not a bad part to do it, considering
it was almost my fist pump.
So I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but Guillermo Del Toro has a
penchant.
Oh, you know what? The thesis statement. That's what we need to do. Let's do that first. That's my bad. So the thesis statement, we always like to make this big, bold statement, whether it's about the film or about the task at hand or the subject at hand, which is Guillermo del Toro. And I think we came up with a pretty good one for him. We were talking so much about his career over the last I mean, his career period. And what you and I came up with is Guillermo Del Toro is the most polarizing Best Director winner working this century.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation when you talk about the guys that have won, or guys and the couple women who have won Best Director at the Oscars. There's some, classics in there, people that are incredibly talented that we all know their names. And then there's people who've been nominated that have never gotten there. A lot of the fan favorites that have gotten, like Nolan and Fincher,
right.
They've never won.
Right.
So to win, it's definitely a kind of a bizarre group of people. And I think somebody like Danny Boyle is a guy that comes to mind who's got a very interesting career. And he won in 2008 for Slumdog, but he doesn't really swing for the fences with like franchise comic book movies. GDT made Blade 2. He made Blade 2 in The Shape of Water.
Right. It doesn't get more on the opposite ends of the spectrum than that. But then you keep going and you look at his career and it's like, okay, Mimic and Pacific Rim and now Nightmare Alley. It's like these movies are so all over the place. They all clearly have like that beautiful Guillermo Del Toro touch in them, and it makes sense why he picks these movies. But then when you actually look at his filmography, and, we didn't want to use divisive because I don't think he's a divisive director. I think most people actually really like him. But I think what's interesting is inside of this polarizing filmography, people are incredibly split down the middle about a lot of movies. Shape of Water being one of them. I remember a lot of people in LA at least were like, oh yeah, Shape of Water is great. I think it's going to win. And then a lot of people that I talked to, like where I'm from or back in Utah or places I go visit, it was like, the hell is Shape of Water?
Totally.
Like she's having sex with a fish? Is that what it is?
Well, because I think the other thing, too, is like you look at some other people, like Chloe Zhao is another example of somebody who's made, she made Eternals and she also made Nomadland.
Yeah.
But with The Rider, she's only got a few movies. You can't really call it a polarizing filmography. GDT's been working for a very long time. And you go back further before this century to guys like Zemeckis, and they've got interesting careers. But I really do think GDT has a wider breadth of movies that touch multiple genres. He's kind of like the ultimate fan favorite Oscar guy, because like the people who are like, oh, this is the bro that got me Pacific Rim and Blade 2,
right,
and then the other person's like, yeah, but he made Nightmare Alley, Pan's Labyrinth, and Shape of Water. Like, it's like not the same movie fan.
It's really interesting, and I love what he's doing. I'm really excited to see what he does with Pinocchio. I think that he could give it this little dark edge to it, and obviously what he does with his creatures and his monsters. I think he's kind of the perfect, different type of director to do one of these, whatever they're called, what is it called? Remakes? Just another Disney remake. So yeah, I mean, I
fucking
remake, a rejigger. I just couldn't remember the word. So that being said, now let's get into the face smashing part because this is a lot of fun. He likes to destroy faces in a gnarly, realistic, brutal, bone crunching, blood gushing, like. Just the sound design.
I was just going to say, so there's a couple elements. Let's start with the sound, because you mentioned it. So the sound is one of the most important parts to any scene of violence in a movie. Yep. And he really hits the nail on the head. There's the bone crushing. There's this sound of like cartilage and bone smashing.
And like flesh tearing.
It's a really upsetting sound. The second one is there's a brutality of like repetition in the motion usually in all the scenes where it's like, it's not just... because there's in Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the Fincher movie. Yeah. There's that moment where he swings the golf club. And, remember? And what's his name? Stellan Skarsgård's face, and it's like a great...
It's a good, jaw out of place, and there's like a cut.
But it's a single hit.
It's one hit.
Whereas all of the ones we're talking about, they're brutal, blunt force trauma, repeated, just like, I'm going to obliterate your face.
And I feel like he's the only, director. I mean, the fact that he has 4 of these that we're going to talk about is already a lot, considering his filmography is not that vast. But the fact that he has done this, there's not a lot of people in action movies, in horror movies, in thrillers where this type of thing happens, where you see people get hit in the face a bunch of times and then kind of nothing happens. I remember when Fincher did it with Fight Club, people were like, oh my God.
Yeah.
What he does to Leto in that, you're like, this is what would happen.
God, Fincher might be the runner-up of this category.
Right, yeah, he's got some pretty gnarly ones.
He's got some pretty good ones, right?
But that happening, him hitting him over and over and over in the face, you started to see what happened. You see the aftermath, right? When he comes back from the hospital, you're like, Jesus.
Yeah.
Guillermo's is a little different because none of these people live.
And the other thing, so the second element I would say is the visual element, which is that you get a flash. You get one frame.
He always shows you a couple of them.
It's like a quick frame. Actually, I think the last one with Holt McElhaney is
Yeah.
probably the longest you get. But it's a
Yeah.
quick frame usually where you see the destruction of the face. The sound,
Ooh.
the repetition, and that quick visual creates this just like... So let's go through them.
Yeah.
Let's go through some of the best ones.
Let's go through it chronologically.
Yeah.
Right.
The earliest example.
The first time that I was traumatized by Guillermo Del Toro, and we both just watched Pan's Labyrinth again over the last couple weeks. This is honestly the least shown of all four that we're talking about.
The least
but it was
graphic.
like the first one that we saw.
Yeah.
And it's the two farmers are out hunting for rabbits, and this asshole captain thinks he's lying to him, and the son keeps talking out of place.
Yeah.
And I even remember watching this just a couple weeks ago, and like I started to tense up.
like,
So I was
"Don't
like,
do
oh
it."
man, here it comes. And you're like, shut up, dude. Just shut up. Like, and then he turns and he starts hitting him with the butt of the pistol.
He's pistol whipping him, and it's like it's wild because, like, as you said, in action movies, I punch you and you fall down, right. But that's not what happens. It's like he hits him and he just like moves back and he hits him. It's like
Yeah, you're like chipping away.
His face is caving in.
in.
Oh God, it's so savage.
And then he's still kind of standing there, right?
and the dad's watching.
He's like, you asshole! Yeah, you killed him! Like, oh my God,
it's making me uncomfortable just to think about it. It's so savage.
It's so brutal. And then, of course, because Guillermo is Guillermo, you see then, right afterwards, they pull the rabbit out of the bag. And he's like, next time, search these people more properly before bringing them to me. So you're like, all right, that's the bad guy, and he is fucked up.
And just a quick honorable mention. Later in the movie, when the captain gets killed, we talked about this.
Oh, yeah.
The bullet goes like through his cheek,
And the
right
eye,
here.
like, rolls up into his head.
And it's like, it's just another one of those like interesting destruction of a face
Yes.
that Guillermo is famous for. Yeah, it's amazing.
Because he goes and he's like adding this level of realism, because how many times have you guys seen in movies where it's just like they get shot right in the center of the forehead, it's like clean in, clean out, or even like, the back of the head blows out or whatever, but it's just like, okay, so if someone gets shot in the head and we want to make a point, we got to shoot him right in the middle of the forehead, right? It's like, no, dude, shoot him in the cheek or like hit him in the side of the face with a golf club, and let's see that realism. I forgot about that because he does such a good job with the eye rolling and blood and all that. So next up in our lovely destruction of faces.
And this is one more. This is after, by the way, the captain gets his fucking...
He gets jokered.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. There's so much violence.
Oh, and when he's like sewing it.
Oh, God.
This is and this whole thing kind of leads to a conversation that I want to have about Chronos later on. So then the next one in order that we want to talk about is going to be the one from Crimson Peak. I think this is maybe the most brutal one because of what you were talking about before the show. Yes, we were talking about this in depth before the show. Was like, as the dad's head is getting bashed into the sink and you're seeing the blood, you're seeing the sink break and all that, there's the quick moment where he like kind of gets away, right?
A little bit. He gets his face smashed, and like you're like, oh, that's not good. And then he like starts
bad.
He like starts to pull away, and then they get him again, and then the face goes to the same spot again. And this is what's crazy. The sink breaks, and when it's over, there's water and blood flowing out of the spot that's broken on the sink. Like,
yes.
This is why Guillermo's such a genius, because he conceptualizes every beat of this and how it's gonna, and the visuals of all of these.
When he gets away for a second, you see the destruction of what has happened, and that's only like, we're just getting started on killing this guy in that moment. It is so gnarly, and it you end up finding out later on who does it, and it all works out great for the story. But that, to me, when I watched that, I did one of those like, oh shit!
You called me. You were like, we have to do a segment on the show
about
destroying
faces. This is insane. And then the most recent one, in his most recent film, A Nightmare Alley, he gives us a twofer, a little back-to-back.
It's a two, and I didn't even remember that there was two because I watched it. Yeah, it's like it starts out when Cooper's losing it and he's destroying Richard Jenkins. He's just beating him to death
because he has brass knuckles on, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, or something, right? So he like beats him to death, and they give you a quick cut. And his nose is gone.
His nose is just like gone, and then it looks like the top of his lip is gone too, and it's just like teeth there. And it's like, he looks kind of like a zombie.
I think he must be wearing brass knuckles, because I don't think you could, with just a fist...
No, I think he is wearing them, yeah.
I don't think you could do that to someone's face.
No. The nose is completely gone, and you don't even see the destruction of it. You only see the first two parts that we love, which is just the sound, and the crunching, and like the blood. And then, when his bodyguard comes out and sees him... Holt McCallany.
There you go.
Is that right? Then you get the close-up on Jenkins' face. You're like, oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
But don't worry. It's not yet done yet. He goes and chases after Cooper and Mara, and then he hits him with the car, and he goes over it. And then he puts the car in drive, and he goes and he just runs him straight over. And what does GDT do? He gives us a beautiful, 2 seconds of letting us soak up what we're seeing.
Because he likes to do, I think what he likes to do is be like, okay, so car driving, person run over. He doesn't like to let the audience be like, okay, guys run over. He has Holt start to sit up. The car hits him as he's sitting up. And then it's like, you imagine that the bottom, the undercarriage has ripped a part of his face off.
Yes.
And you see it in a way that makes it feel like that's exactly what has happened, and that's why Guillermo. I'm sorry for anybody who's turned this off, because I know we're cheering on the most gruesome shit you've ever heard of, but that's what is so insane about.
I'm glad we spent his arm and all that. It's so beautifully realistic, though.
I'm glad we spent as much time on this as we did, because this it does really feel like the heart of the episode is this segment. Yeah, just bananas. Really, really impressive stuff. If we're forgetting one that any of you guys have watched recently,
please let us know. Because there is one also in Chronos, but it's not as good. It's like he gets hit in the head a lot when he's getting killed. I can't remember the guy's name, like the kind of bad guy. But again, I feel like he build and ramped up through pans to Crimson to what we got in Nightmare Alley. He even gave us back to back. So
do you think one of those scenes that we're talking about is expensive?
It's interesting because honestly, it can't be that expensive. It's probably pretty minor prosthetics and a lot of makeup.
Yeah.
But I think if you're doing a good job with the makeup and the real looking blood, and you have a great makeup artist, which clearly Guillermo's working with the best and has for a long time, and maybe he adds a little CG in with the eye shot and pans, because the little blood that comes into his eye. I don't think so, but I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, as somebody who's been on a lot more sets than me, I just was curious if you've watched shit like that go down. I've never been on a set while they do something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm always curious, does that take days?
I bet it was probably a couple hours for Jenkins in that moment, because it was such a good close up.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there was a green something over his nose.
Yeah.
Can they just CG it off? And I'm not 100% sure. But again, guys, let us know in the comments if you're watching on YouTube any of your thoughts about the face destruction or how it's done or the cost. Is it literally just time in the chair and paying a bigger makeup team, right?
Yeah.
Is it something like that? So now that we've gotten through that pleasant segment of the show, let's move on to more of the best and the worst. So we always like to pull the ratings and reviews off of Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb. This is not how we're going to score, or our scores won't come based off of this, but this is a good way to kind of put it into perspective for you guys. So let's talk through the best and the worst here.
Yeah, so his best rated movie all time is 95%, Pan's Labyrinth, with an 8.2 on IMDb. It's really good for both. 8.2 is extremely high. That's got to be... we didn't check it.
I'm going to check it right now.
I would guess that's top 100, top 50 even. And it makes sense. We've talked about this a lot, but movies that came out, movies that were new released somewhere between 1999 and 2007, a lot of those movies are in the sweet spot of IMDb's top 50 just by virtue of the sheer number of people that were becoming, these enthusiasts that wanted to rate movies on IMDb.
It's 136.
Yeah. And so a lot of movies, I don't think Pan's Labyrinth is one of... I mean, maybe it's the 136th greatest movie ever. It's a great movie.
Yeah, it's great.
But I mean, it's a classic example of a movie that has a really high rating from a lot of people that rated it then.
Yeah.
And I think now if that movie was to get rated, I think it would probably get rated a little lower.
Yeah, it might just be around 8.
Yeah.
Or 7.9, 8.1, around that area. Next is Devil's Backbone at 92% and a 7.4.
Shockingly high for a movie that never gets talked about.
I have... anytime we do this show, and especially with the Schmodown, we run into a lot of people that know a lot and love to talk about movies more than anyone you'll probably meet in your whole lives. And no one ever says anything about Devil's Backbone other than where it lands in his career, which is right after Chronos, I believe.
Yeah.
And they're just it's fine. I'm shocked to see that it has a 7.4 on IMDb, which is also its second highest, or his second highest film on IMDb, I believe. And Devil's Backbone at 92% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's just one of those that It was good.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, there is also the other thing too about Rotten Tomatoes. We mentioned this sometimes, but the rating on is an aggregate of positive or negative. So that just means 92% of people gave it a thumbs up as opposed to a thumbs down.
Right.
And that's a good thing, but it's not. Sometimes there's a misnomer that like a bunch of people gave this movie a 92% out of 100,
yeah,
which is not the case.
Next up is Shape of Water at 92% as well, and 7.3 on IMDb, so just 0.1 lower than Devil's Backbone. And then you get into the bottom three, Blade 2, Mimic, and Pacific Rim at 58, 64, and 72%. Not really any surprises there. I mean, 72% is not bad.
I'm kind of shocked that Mimic's not the lowest.
Yeah.
That's the only surprise that I have, because I feel like people are kind of fan favorites on Blade.
And I'm pretty sure when I looked on IMDb, I think Mimic is the lowest at 6.0, and I think Crimson Peak might be just above it at 6.2. It's his second lowest on IMDb. So really kind of interesting.
Crimson Peak is kind of the, for lack of a better term, it's kind of the redheaded stepchild of his filmography, in the sense that like it's not, it's not disowned.
Yeah.
It exists, and the people that like it really like it, but it's not considered great, and it's not considered horrible. It's like this movie that just sort of happened, and it's a GDT movie.
Yeah, and
horror fans really like it, I think.
It's fine. I think one of the things that's really interesting, and this is a good time to get into Guillermo Del Toro over, under, or properly rated before we actually rate the best and the worst of his films. Guillermo is known as like being the master of his little monsters and creatures. He takes pride in it. He talks about it all the time, and it's clear if you watch any of his movies, even in something like Nightmare Alley, that is very much kind of grounded in reality. You still get like the weird creature in the jar and like the whole freak show thing and the geek, period. Now, Crimson Peak, what we were just talking about, I thought that this movie suffered the most from, I mean, it's a fine story. Everyone does a good enough job, but like the ghosts, the
effects,
phantasms, the effects, whatever you want to call it, them, whatever those spirits are, they're distractingly not good.
Yeah.
It's a rare miss for me.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of CGI going on there, and they're just not particularly good CGI. It's also a really weird cast. It's like it's a cast of a bunch of actors who I really like, but none of them feel special in the movie. Like they all feel kind of like, like Jessica Chastain's fine, and Mia Wasikowska's fine,
right,
and Tom Hiddleston's fine, and Charlie Hunnam's fine. None of them stand out.
Hunnam.
Maybe the best person in the movie is Hiddleston. Probably it's Hiddleston, I think.
And then what's interesting though is because, like you were saying, is all of it's CG. But then when you look at like Pacific Rim, those things are pretty sweet. Like the kaiju and the what are they called?
Jaegers.
The Jaegers, yeah. Nice. Yeah, the kaiju and the
Jaeger
Jaegers
pilots were like rock stars.
I was born in Los Angeles. Where are you?
San Francisco.
Yeah, him and Henry Goulding are really good at those American accents. But on this one, like they were pretty sweet. The Jaegers and the kaiju all completely CG. It looks like, but they're designed in a way that's like much more appealing and interesting. Like the mechanics and the physics that go into like the way that the machines work and like the rocket punch and like some of the stuff. It's all pretty cool.
I think if I was going to... Well, so it's a good time to ask the question. Do you think that Guillermo del Toro is overrated, underrated, or properly rated?
I mean, I think it's really hard to say that he's not properly rated because I don't think you can say he's underrated. I mean, he's a Best Director winner, for the last movie he did. That also won Best Picture, right?
For Shape of Water,
Yeah. So, the one before Nightmare. So, it's hard to say that someone like that is underrated. And then when you look at what's coming next in his career, it's Pinocchio, right?
Yeah.
And you only get that movie if you're a pretty big director. And Guillermo clearly picks and chooses what he wants to do. I think he's properly rated because I don't believe that there are enough moments in his career that happen regularly that if what he's doing now is kind of a trajectory, if it's like, Shape of Water, then Nightmare Alley, and then Pinocchio ends up blowing my mind, then maybe I'll say he's underrated. But as of right now, I think he's just completely properly rated because of the awards that he's won and because he has done movies that I found like kind of lackluster. I didn't love Crimson Peak. I thought it was fine. I hated Pacific Rim when I saw it the first time, but I liked it a lot more when I rewatched it recently. And in like Mimic, you kind of understand because it's so early in his career, but it's like really bad.
A lot of directors kind of have that. I think the most significant inflection point in his career for is he a good director or is he a bad director, is Pacific Rim. That's the movie that, like, to me, that's the most polarizing movie that he's ever made, because
some people do love that movie.
He got a sequel. The people that love Pacific Rim love Pacific Rim. It's a really interesting movie for a guy like him to make before he goes deep in the tank with two Oscar movies and, like, you know, Crimson Peak, which is kind of a schlocky horror movie.
Right.
And I think you can... If you love if you love Pacific Rim, you probably love GDT. If you hate this movie, you probably think, and I don't hate this movie, but I think that Guillermo Del Toro is overrated. And
really?
Yeah, and my reasoning is not that I don't like
fair.
his stuff.
I think it's fair.
I really like Guillermo Del Toro's stuff. When we get to our top three, I mean, I think all three of his top three movies are brilliant. Problem is, past the top three, I really don't think he's got more than maybe one other good movie. I think the rest of the stuff in the filmography is above average at best. Yeah. Like, I think a lot of the stuff early in his career that was cool is still kind of cool. It's just like, you know, for instance, like, we're not going to put Hellboy 2: The Golden Army in our top. I like that movie.
I do too. I think it's better than the first one.
I think that movie's good. I don't think that movie's great. I think, but
it's the same bad guy that he uses in Blade 2 also, which is, I think, the best part of both of those movies.
Yeah, I just think that the reason I say overrated is I think when I mentioned fan favorite, he is such a fan favorite director. He's revered. People love GDT. And I think GDT
it's because he's brilliant.
Yeah.
Right? Like, brilliant. What he does in film and the way that he shoots, and again, like the colors and you know, the symbolism and all that stuff. Like, he's truly brilliant, but that's also why he's a total film nerd's favorite director.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah. If you ask me to write down for you right now who are the 20 best living working directors, he's on the list. He might even be top 10. Like, he's a great director. It's just that I think for a lot of people he's like the best director, and I just don't think that's true. I think he gets a lot of credit for the weird choices that he's made, and I think that in reality, without those couple Oscars, if he hadn't won the Oscar, if Shape of Water just wasn't the movie that year, and that just didn't happen, it was just a medium movie or even nominated, I think the knock on him would be like, yeah, he's like above average, he's cool,
he's
just
like a pretty good director,
and then I would say he's probably underrated.
Right.
But the fact that he did win, he gets like this extra juice now that I think is maybe like.
I think that's really fair. I mean, that was the only other way I think the conversation could go, is properly or overrated. I do think it's really interesting if you were to ask everyone in your family, and if I was to ask everyone in my family, what's your favorite Guillermo del Toro movie?
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone in my family, my sisters and my mom, I think maybe my nephews and nieces, since they're older and of a different generation, might know, but I don't think they could name one movie of his.
I think my brother would probably be like,
I think your brother would.
Didn't he direct Pan's Labyrinth? That's probably what he would say.
Yeah, and I think if anything, that would be the one that someone remembered. But I truly believe it would probably be zero people in my family know who he is. And I think that speaks a lot for like the type of films that he makes and the type of films that he makes that have success and the ones that don't.
Yeah.
Right? If Pacific Rim was like regarded as this like incredible action blockbuster with some of the coolest monsters and machines you've ever seen, that's the type of movie that I think would kind of go out to everyone in America, at least.
Do you know how much I wish he had made the sequel instead of making Crimson Peak? Like, if he had made Uprising and he had like done it and committed to it and made a movie that was awesome that he wanted to make, I would have been so stoked, because like I know, because we've seen with sequels, all he does is he's like Cameron. He makes great sequels. He's like fully aware of like elevating action, understanding that you need to be cooler than the first movie. He's really great at that.
Yeah.
And I think he could have taken Pacific Rim and made a better sequel.
Because in my opinion, I think Blade 2 is better than Blade.
Agreed.
And I think Hellboy 2 is better than Hellboy.
I agree.
Which is really interesting and a really difficult thing to do. So now it's time to get into it. Now it's time to get into the best and the worst of Guillermo del Toro, our 3 favorite and our 3 least favorite of his films. I don't want to say that we hate them, but yeah, his bottom 3 and his top 3. Let us know what you guys think about him being over, under, properly rated, and also let us know what your top 3 and bottom 3 are, because we'd love to see them. We'd love to see how different ours are. I feel like our list is pretty straightforward, honestly.
I think so too. We'll start with the worst.
Yeah.
The worst movie that he's ever made, Mimic. Mimic's an interesting movie. There's 2 things about Mimic that stand out to me.
It doesn't end, I feel like.
Yeah. you can get sort of the teases of the career he's going to have. Some of the creature design is really cool. There is a schlocky horror vibe to it that is consistent. Mira Sorvino had won the Oscar for Mighty Aphrodite, a film that came out in 1996, if I recall, or 95. But This is like that situation in Hollywood where they're like, "Oh, you win Oscar, we put you in movie,
Right.
We pay you a bunch of money to star in this
Cruise
movie."
in Philip Seymour Hoffman in MI3, Nic Cage's whole entire action run after leaving Las Vegas.
It's happened for years. It's a Hollywood thing, and Mira Sorvino's movie being Mimic is like hysterical to me. It's like such a bad movie. And then the other thing that's weird is like Josh Brolin's in this movie as like a young 20s guy,
like a young cop,
and he like in my mind is either teenager in Goonies or 40. He like turned like when he showed up in No Country, I was like, oh, this is a great newcomer. He's 40 years old. And people were like, are you kidding? Like Josh Brolin's been in movies forever.
Yeah.
Like, and I was like, oh, I didn't know who this was.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to him before then. And it's crazy to think about the last 15 years for that dude. What an incredible...
Goonies came out in 85.
I know.
No Country came out in 2007.
I know. And it's like everything in between there was pretty... You didn't watch it for him.
No.
You know?
That's 22 years. That's insane.
I remember watching Mimic as a kid, and you know, when you're a kid watching that movie, I was, you know, a few years old. It was like... I mean, it's not a few years old, but you know what I mean? It was like, oh, wow, this is pretty scary and weird and creepy and stuff. But like now that I'm in my 30s and this movie's been around for a long time, it's just pretty bad. It's not great. So that's our bottom film. Our next film up is going to be Hellboy.
It's kind
of
a
original
little
Hellboy.
This, and I know this is a little bit, you know, polarizing,
sacrilegious, yeah,
for some people. But you know, for us, this is just not a movie that either of us particularly like. I think it's a movie that, in terms of like originality, has aged pretty badly. It feels like a movie that existed in the pre-MCU era, where it was like, if you made a comic book property into an actually watchable movie, you had made like a masterpiece, because so many of the comic movies were terrible. And you go back, you look, and you're like, well, yeah, this was better than the Fantastic Four movies. This was better than like most of what was happening. But you compare it to like comic book movies that get made now, and for the most part, unless you're talking about Morbius, this is like... You know, this is a totally fine, not very watchable movie with a great lead. He does a good job.
Yeah, and I love that Guillermo and Ron Perlman are homies. I love that they've worked together as many times as they have. It's shocking that he's not in Shape of Water. Yeah. It's like the one. I just, you know, even just starting this movie and like the doctor and his accent and finding Hellboy with the soldiers, I was just like, ugh. Like, I don't want to watch this whole thing. I don't know why. I know that he's done a great thing. I know that he creates this really cool world. I know that he gets to showcase a lot of his best or his favorite things, again, like the creatures and monsters. But Hellboy just doesn't really do it for me. So next up on the list, in the bottom three, our third worst is going to be...
Legends of the Guardians, the Owls of it. No, I'm kidding.
He did this movie.
Our third one is going to be Blade 2, a movie that we both kind of like. Look, there's a part
I
of
love
me
Blade 2.
There's a part of me that wants to trash a different movie because I don't like
Pacific Rim in there.
Yeah, but I just did rewatch Blade 2 for this because it's been 20 years. Originally, this episode was actually going to be a retrospective episode on Blade 2.
Yeah.
We just changed our minds after we watched Nightmare Alley, and we were like, this is a way better
That's
idea.
what we want to talk about. Yeah, Blade 2 is sweet. I think that, like, the whole design of what he does with, you know, Nomak and his, like, face coming out. And,
looks like remarkably good 20 years later.
It does look pretty damn good, especially the first couple that we see. As we see more of them with, like, the other creatures, I guess it's maybe not as great, but... I think this movie's pretty sweet. I think it's better than the first Blade. They capitalize on all the best things about it with kind of pushing the envelope a little bit more. I do think that, you know, Nomak and his creatures are pretty scary, and I like the whole like team up aspect. It feels just kind of like a, you know, a dumb 2000s action movie in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, this is like when you talk about like the style.
Can you blush?
Yeah, the style that like it feels like Sony is going for right now with the Spider-Verse. This like, and a lot of people have described that they've described Venom as like a corny early 2000s comic book movie. Mm-hmm. Blade 2 is exactly that.
Yeah.
Like it is exactly what that style is. It's cheesy. It's got silly dialogue. It's not taking itself that seriously. It's got some cool superhero stuff.
Some good action.
And if you like get over the whole like I need to be watching cinema and you can just enjoy it.
Yeah.
Blade 2 is great. It's like a very fun movie to watch. It's done well.
It's some of Wesley's best action, in my opinion.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so that's going to be our bottom three.
They were like, we couldn't get Steven Dorff because he's dead. Let's get Norman Reedus. He kind of looks like him.
He's not dead. Yeah, well. Mimic, Hellboy, and Blade 2 are our bottom three. So now getting into our top three. I think these are probably the unanimous best three, but I will say the only other movie that I watched in his filmography that I could talk myself into being in this top three would actually be Chronos.
Oh, you liked it a lot.
I think it's our honorable mention for this episode. I watched it and I was pretty blown away at how interesting I thought it was and how intriguing I thought it was. I want to know what was going on. You see, like, I think Guillermo also has a bit of an obsession with clocks and gears. You see them in his movies a lot, especially in Hellboy 2, but you see them in Chronos because the whole thing is that this like little stopwatch clock thing, it like makes you live forever, essentially. And then inside of it is like a little like worm or insect. You don't really ever know what it is, but you see it.
He loves to combine the mechanical with the weird, like weird, gross creatures.
Yes,
it's like a thing
yes.
that, right? It's just pans. It's like we have this this golden castle and all these like very intricate like maze and all these symbols, and then you have this weird looking radish creature that's gonna be under the bed that you're putting into a fucking bowl of milk.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so cool to see him do that in Chronos. I think the only reason this isn't in my top 3 is because, and I never say this really about directors and their movies that I like, is I would love to see this remade by him. Yeah. I would love to see him be able to do this again with a bigger budget, with bigger stars. I'm okay with it still being completely in Spanish because Pan's Labyrinth is totally in Spanish and I love that. I would just love to see him with more money, a better makeup team, and maybe a little bit more of a guided hand now that he's been doing it for that much longer. But a shockingly good movie if you guys haven't seen Chronos. So now our true top 3, starting with...
Number 3, we are going to go with Nightmare Alley. We talked to you guys about it at length already. As I said, there's an argument this is number 1. And honestly, as the years pass, it's possible. I wouldn't even be surprised, really, if as the years pass and I watch it again, if I do make this my number 1. I tend to have an aversion to making whatever the new hotness is.
Yes.
And I even have a rule with my like top 50 movies of... anything that came out in the last year, I like try to wait to see how I feel about it a year later.
I was trying to articulate that at the top of the show, but I'm glad that you're saying it again here because it is important. I think you need to let time pass and then revisit it. And you might like it more, but you might like it less. You know?
Man, you remember a few years ago I made my top 50? Mm-hmm. It was on that computer that got stolen, and it was never backed up on the cloud. It's
a bummer.
And I don't have the list.
And now I don't know what those movies are at all.
I want to redo it took me 2 months last time.
It's a really difficult thing to do. I told you then, and I'm going to tell you again now, I cannot take on. It's too much. It's too stressful for me.
There's some movies that because I did it like 4 years ago, I think, or 5 years ago, and there's some movies that I've watched since that I definitely think have made it. I know Infinity War is in there. I know Pretty Woman made the list because I hadn't seen it yet.
Yeah.
There's some movies that I think, that's a project I'll get on.
I wonder if any of his movies will, and I wonder if Nightmare Alley is one of them. I think the reason that we put it at number 3 below the other 2 films is obviously, like you just said, it's his newest film. But I think the other thing is kind of what happened with both of us. I think you had it a little bit less than I did, but for a moment when you first started watching it where you were like, is this movie going to be sweet? Like, it did take you a minute to get like hooked into it. And then for me, it was, I told you guys the whole story about trying to rewatch it over and over and then starting it over. It's a little bit less compelling and intriguing than I think the other movies above it. Just slightly.
Yeah.
So at number 2, we're going to put The Shape of Water.
And this is an interesting one because I think that if you guys are watching this or listening to this and you are GDT fans, like huge fans.
They're like, we are, and you need to stop calling him that.
There's a good chance that you're in the camp that's like, why would you put Shape of Water in his top 3? It's not one of his best movies. Put Hellboy 2. Like, there's people that really love those movies, and he has those two halves of the fans. It's clear that you and I skew on the side of the critical acclaim more than the franchise movies. Shape of Water is a beautiful movie. There's so many great performances.
The music is incredible.
Alexander Desplat, who has become, I would say, up there with Hans Zimmer as one of the 3 or 4 best working composers. His music in this is amazing.
It's phenomenal. It brings such a levity and fairy tale like feel to the movie. Michael Shannon is incredible in this movie. Good. He's such a good villain. Octavia Spencer is amazing.
Jenkins is so good in this movie.
Everyone is so great in this film, especially Best Actress winner that we never talk about ever.
Yeah, well, she didn't win, but she was nominated.
Excuse me, Best Actress nominee, Sally Hawkins, and she's really good in this movie.
She's phenomenal. So is Doug Jones, right? He play the creature?
Yeah, he plays the creature. He's always incredible. I mean, so when I watched this, last week or whatever it was, I had forgotten how kind of perfect this movie is. I feel like it moves along great. I think that the fact that Shannon is there early on, you already get there's the bad guy, there's the creature, this is our protagonist, some shit is going to go awry.
One of the things that I think is so cool about this movie is so you have like this creature, and you have Sally Hawkins, and it's this improbable, bizarre romance.
And it's a good romance.
And then the fact that they have the room fill up with water.
Yeah.
It's such a magical, fairy tale, weird story. It's exactly what GDT is so good at.
Yes.
Is like, I'm sorry, I keep calling him that. It's exactly what he's so good at, is like creating these scenarios where you're like, well, he's like a fish creature. And it's like, well, what if they just filled a room with water? What would happen? It's like, do that. Let's see that scene.
And even though you know that this movie is not like super supernatural, or like it's trying to feel like a little grounded, but like those moments, those fairy tale moments, make you feel like you're watching this beautiful fantasy film. And there's something, because it's like the water's leaking through the floor, but it's not leaking really through the door. Like it is coming a little bit out the door, a little bit out of the apartment, but like physics is not real clearly in this room. But I think it is a truly beautiful shot. And then when Jenkins opens the door and he sees everything, it's maybe the most hard to pull off and well executed love story in film.
Yeah, it's a bizarre movie.
The Fishman.
This is just one of those movies where it's like only, and that's kind of why calling him overrated almost feels wrong on some days, because it's like, how many directors make these movies? Like the movies that he's making, this Shape of Water, how many directors make that movie? That's such a strange concept of a movie. But it leads us to our number one, which you guys probably can see coming, Pan's Labyrinth. This was a little weird because we did the rewatch, both of us. And both of us had the same reaction, which was like, this movie's pretty great, man. Like, it's really aged well. I mean, there's a little bit of CGI problem with the fawn. It doesn't really bother me. You can see it just a little
bit. But what's really so impressive is just Doug Jones.
Yeah.
And the way that he moves as the fawn. It's like parts of it so like, it's like he gets stuck almost. Or it's just incredible. And the fact that he also is the blind man or whatever in there.
Oh god, the pale man.
Yeah, the pale man. Yeah,
one of the best film creatures ever. I think the pale man.
Yeah,
and also just all the designs in the movie. That little weird like ginger creature.
That thing is cool and weird.
And then when it's thrown in the fire and it's screaming,
screams,
like there's just so much in this movie that's like,
and like all the little fairies that are there.
And when the pale man's eating them, I mean, and the way it ends too, like it's a really I've said this a lot, but like. The thing about this movie that really stands out to me is, so when we were growing up, I was really into, like when I was like 12 years old, I was really into like nu metal, like Korn and stuff. Remember those bands?
Sick.
Yeah, I was really into those bands. And there was, there's like, I would describe it as this sort of like hot topic trend.
Do you like Nine Inch Nails?
Kind of. They were a little before. They were a little, that's like earlier 90s. But there was like a trend of like, dark fairy tale, hot topic, makeup, whatever. This is like a lot of bands. There was a lot of like theme in a lot of the music from those bands that was like the twisted fairy tale, ring around the rosy.
Right, yeah.
And you look back at a lot of the stuff that I thought was cool then, and it feels kind of lame now. I mean, I don't know if it is. It just feels sillier now. Mm-hmm. This movie is exactly that, but in an awesome way that does not feel at all silly.
It doesn't feel like it's aged at all.
It like achieves dark fairy tale in a way that does not feel gimmicky in the fucking slightest, which is such a hard thing to pull off. And I couldn't believe rewatching this 15 years later that I was like, wow, none of this feels lame. This does not feel of its time in the way that music totally does.
And the girl is incredible in it. The captain, it's funny when you look at these top three, what do they all have in common? And I've said this since we used to do AMA. Is a great movie, a great hero has to have a great villain.
All three do, yeah.
Nightmare Alley, who's the villain? Bradley Cooper.
Well, yeah,
really, and Cate Blanchett.
Yeah,
but he's our protagonist and she's our villain, and then it kind of swaps. And then Shape of Water, Shannon, Pan's Labyrinth, the captain is maybe the best one, period. Even when he's like torturing that poor stuttering guy, and then the doctor killing him, then he kills the doctor. Like, there's so many layers to how horrible he is.
God, just by the way, just remembered this. Yet another like incredible. He's such a genius at this. The doctor gets shot. He feels it. He keeps walking for a second. He like knows he's been shot.
He's dead. Yeah.
And the way that he like proudly tries to keep walking. Yeah. God, it's just so good.
It's
like so memorable.
And the way that you find out that the captain like stole this famous general's watch that was supposed to go to his son, and then he repaired it, and then he wants to do that for his own son, and then it like all again, a perfect bow on top, and he's like, at least know that my son knows my name, or like knows my name and when I died or all that. She's like, he won't even know you existed. And then just the shot that we talked about in the side of the face, it's so good. But also, both of our female protagonists die at the end of their respective movies, kind of. I mean, Shape of Water, that's where the fantasy comes in, where you're like, well, does she actually become this fish person with gills, or is that did she die and then whatever? But Pan's Labyrinth was shocking when it happened in 2006.
Yeah, it was crazy that she dies. It's like you think she's going to come back to life somehow.
You think that he's not going to kill her. Like, you think that she's going to win, but she doesn't.
I think the last thing about Pans before we wrap the show up that I'll say is just, it's very, very rare. Look, I live in America. I watch a lot of American movies with a lot of actors that I recognize, and I am more than willing to give credit where credit's due on any foreign film that gets my attention, because there's just not as many of them in America that get as much attention as they should.
Yep.
Just a lot of them don't. When a movie like Parasite, for instance, comes over here and is as incredible as it is, it's memorable.
It's like City of God, The Lives of Others, the original Old Boy, Parasite, even Squid Game coming through. There's so few that actually break through from other markets that it's hard to watch it all in America.
Yeah, and the subtitles. So when a movie like this that has basically no stars in it, like nobody that you recognize, can be this impactful, and then all these years later, when the effects have aged, and you still don't have a star to hold on to, and it's still subtitled, and it still feels like the best one, that's like how I was like, if I'm looking for the edge, that's how this movie gets the edge for me.
And I know that it could sound almost like a little ignorant, but I totally understand and agree with what you're saying. Movies that have subtitles in the day and age that we live in, don't get me wrong, I'm half Korean and I'm half Indian. I love subtitled and I love foreign films. However, I am also a person that lives in 2022 where I like to be on my phone. I like to get up. I have ADHD. My phone is literally always screaming to me to pick it up because I'm obsessed with it because of our work and because of blah, 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 blah. So whenever I actually find a good product, like, just because I did recently watch Squid Game a few months ago, and then like rewatching Pan's Labyrinth, and I'm like, I don't even want to look at my phone. I just want to be completely immersed in this, and I want to read every single thing that's happening. It is a very difficult thing to accomplish, especially on top of all the things that you just said. The time, the no stars, the effects aging, all of it. So yeah, Pan's Labyrinth, number one. I'm curious if we were to look back on this in 5 years, if it will have changed at all, but maybe we'll have that conversation in 5 years. So before we get into next week's episode, which is going to be a really exciting one, last thing, are you excited about Pinocchio?
I am. Yeah, I am excited about Pinocchio. I think it'll restrict some of the depth of darkness that I think he's good at. Yeah. Disney being what they are, it's a little tough. Like, I'm watching Moon Knight right now, and there was all this buzz on it going in. It's the most brutal show, and it's going to be Daredevil levels of brutal. And it's like, there's nothing brutal about this show.
Yeah, it's not even close to Daredevil.
It's like there's a little bit more blood, I guess.
Punisher. Yeah.
And I'm like, I mean, it's all right. It's not my favorite show. I don't think it's bad, but it's like there's just a level that Disney holds their projects to. They don't really allow. I do think, because the hard thing about this is the dark fairy tale works, but it also works because it's extraordinarily violent. Like, you can't, if you take all the violence out of Pan's Labyrinth, a lot of the upsetting imagery, then it's not the movie that it is. You take out, there's no way the Pale Man's in a Disney kids movie. Like, you can't do that. You can't have like the heads of, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
The torture, like, there's a very violent movie.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes in there that does feel like he might be kind of limited by Disney. Hopefully he'll be able to push the envelope. I think we're both excited about it. We're both ready to see it. And so that's it. That's the best and the worst of Guillermo Del Toro. Next week, we will be doing, in honor of Ambulance, we got something called The Pitch. There it is. That was it. That was a good one. Ambulance. Michael Bay, a guy that you and I have grown up loving a good amount of his movies.
Oh, yeah. Michael Bay has made mostly bad movies, if we're being honest.
And some phenomenal ones.
And some of the bad ones I love.
Yes.
So there's a great conversation to be had. He's also a guy, he even said in an interview promoting Ambulance that he's like, I'll admit it, I made too many Transformers movies.
Yes.
So like he knows. But
no surprise if the bottom three are all Transformers movies.
It'll be really interesting. There's a few movies of his I've never seen before. A couple of the Transformers movies I didn't watch, the later ones. And I think I may have seen everything else, but there's a few that I want to rewatch. We just watched Ambulance in a theater. It was a lot of fun.
Pretty good.
And I think that it'll be great to talk about his career. I said this in the review for Ambulance that I put out, but like, you can only describe Michael Bay as a blockbuster auteur. Like, he's the and he's probably, he and Tony Scott are probably the only ones like who really truly have made their career as like guys that make blockbuster movies and they make art out of blockbusters.
Yeah.
That's all they do. They do not do anything else. They don't know how to do anything else. It's that's their art form.
Yeah, and I'm excited to talk about Ambulance because right when it started, you leaned over to me and you're like, this feels like a Tony Scott movie.
Yeah.
And it really, really did. The stylization and the music and everything. So that's what we're going to be doing on The Best and the Worst next week. The Best and the Worst of Michael Bay. We have a group of generals that we'd like to shout out because of patreon.com/team action. We also have a segment on the show because we had to take a bit of a hiatus. We didn't get to do it this week, but anyone that is a patron in the Action Army at the captain or above tier can submit a question to be on the show. So if you guys like Michael Bay a lot, you want to get involved in the conversation, go check that out, patreon.com/team action.
In the Bayhem. If you want to get involved in the Bayhem, patreon.com/team action.
That was exciting for me.
Yeah.
So here are our generals. Big shout out here to Call Sign Kilmer, Quiz Show, Demon King, Monty, Public Enemy #1, Kaiju, ACP, Robin, Kimura, Moses, Galactus, Bartab, Party J, The Gray,
24601. Call sign hashtag ladies night. JFTB, Quinn, Brosnan, Desperado, Jerry, The Slap, The Rock, Entrapment, and Top Gun. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for listening. We will see you next week on the show.
Bye.